So before diving into it, I will set the scene a little bit, but then the main topic of today will be about field monitoring in itself and how this enables plenty of different use cases within agriculture and so further. And then afterwards, we're also going to address some of the challenges. So setting the scene. Maybe before diving into this discussion, you might be interested in who I am. So hello, I'm Ruben Broekx. I graduated the KU Leuven with a degree in computer science and a major in artificial intelligence. Soon after my graduation, I started out as a machine learning engineer here at Radix. Who is Radix, you might ask? Radix is an artificial intelligence consultancy, and we create and deploy a variety of different artificial intelligence solutions in a wide variety of different sectors. After gathering myself enough experience as a machine learning engineer, I got the opportunity to grow into a team lead and a solution architect role. A team lead means that I'm responsible for both the technical as a professional growth of my team, where as a solution architect, I try to envision solutions that fit the client's needs, while I'm also ensuring that the final solution lives up to the initial expectations. But okay, enough about me. We are talking here about agriculture, nonetheless. And let's maybe first see how agriculture has been revolutionizing the past decades, centuries. Everything started back in the day with your average farmer Joe that did all the hand plucking and the farmery stuff by himself. But quickly he realized, like, okay, it's not really working out. I need to create more yields in a day because there are way more mouths to feed that I can do, than I can manage myself. So there was a revolution of tools. He started to create some tools to make the things go more efficient. And he also started to rely on other factors, say, for example, animals, to put some of the heavy lifting of his shoulders onto that of his horse. Years went by and this went actually perfectly fine. However, then out of the blue, population started to boom and boom. The tractor was born. There was a revolution in heavy machinery so that Farmer Joe could do the things that he would do in days, now in mere hours. However, these revolutions were always like focusing mostly on the muscle, like how can one farmer do even more and heavier work at the same time? But I would actually say that this is not the current standings of agriculture anymore. I would say the future is now, old man. We are now also revolutionizing in intelligence. So indeed, in this, instead of focusing more on doing the heavy lifting, we are now focusing more on intelligence and looking on how one farmer or a bunch of farmers can make better calculated decisions even faster, or even to the extent of starting to automate already some of the decision progresses. So it's in the end a data science community, a meetup, so you might as well expect that artificial intelligence will be a part of it. Before diving into some of the use cases, maybe there is already some people in the audience that have ideas of how artificial intelligence can be used to help out agriculture or revolutionize, if you want to say it. I see some of the people that had some experience already, so go ahead.
So I work with an Estonian company and they take satellite data and we're like measuring humidity, where to plant things and then measuring fields and so much.
Okay, nice.
And I don't know if they had some kind of API so the data could go to the tractor.
Yeah, okay, so that the tractor can plant them for them. Okay, nice. Someone else, any ideas? Yeah, go ahead. Yes, for sure, for sure. So as you see, third one even?
Identification of yield per area.
Yeah, very good. So as you can see, it goes actually quite wide. There are a lot of good use cases, and even the list goes on and on and on. So some of the use cases that I was thinking of myself, or actually that I already saw happening as well, is indeed, as already mentioned, the yield prediction of one specific field. So by using remote sensing of drones and satellite images, we can start analyzing one specific field and also predicting like what is growing on that field and how much the end of the year it will yield from that specific field based on how healthy the field is and other types of factors. But we can also take another view at it, and with the same sensors, or even adding also in-ground sensory data, we can also start to manage the crop a little bit better. Say, for example, do some pest management, and even start predicting if there is a high chance of pests in order to then start preventing it as well. A third use case could then be the appliance of pesticides. So starting to investigate where in your field you actually need to apply the pesticides, and then also applying it only in those areas so that you keep your crop as clean as it can get. And even to the extent of more like the robotics, where you can also develop smart tractors and agribots to compensate for the lack of agricultural workers that you see nowadays. However, these are just some use cases. Of course, you already heard it. There are even way more than that, and just a nice site to show some visuals. But as you might imagine, there are way more use cases. And the amazing part is that every year there's like a new topic or a new angle into agriculture that helps to get even better results faster. That was the scene. Now it is set. Let's dive into one specific use case called field monitoring. The reason why I find this quite an interesting topic is because this is a little bit of the backbone of a lot of different use cases that we saw before. So maybe a better question is, why is field monitoring so important? As I said, it is indeed the ability to monitor one specific field is at the backbone of crop management. So if you know what a field is, you can target that field better. Say, for example, pest management, health, investigating the health of that field, but also starting to predict into the future, like how much yield will be from that crop, how much maybe in like a country base, how much maize fields are there, and how much export can we expect of that specific country. As I said, it will enable quite a lot of things. On one hand, you have an analysis or a management of the agricultural practices. This can, for example, by investigating fields separately, you can see if tillage happened on that field. Tillage is just plowing over the land. You can see if some certain irrigation practices are being applied, or even better, if it's like a very hot summer, if you have to irrigate or water your plants even more. And then again, the pesticide appliance. However, you can also have a look not as a farmer perspective, but like as a third-party perspective. And then, for example, you might be interested in knowing how much crop there is in one country. So see if they have winter crops, have crop rotation is applied, which regular crop is being there, and then you can also couple it together with harvest prediction, knowing, for example, say, for example, now in Ukraine with the war, how much maize are they still having? Is it enough to keep Ukraine going, or is there even like a big export expected? Because this is something we usually tend to rely on in years before the war. So in order to monitor a field, we obviously need to know what a single field is. I think that came quite obvious. So maybe a question to you is, how would you go and try to detect a field's boundaries using remote sensing like satellite or drone imagery? Does anyone have any suggestions? No? Okay, interesting. Then my talk will be useful today. Yeah, indeed, but just drawing in there. Okay. One of the ways is through semantic segmentation, but as we see later, there are different approaches that we have on it today. This is my personal favorite. I already applied some field boundary detection algorithms a few times by now at my work at Radix. And semantic segmentation, I think, in my opinion, is one of the better ones. So for those that are not familiar with semantic segmentation, no worries, I will explain it first. Semantic segmentation is the act of trying to classify each and every pixel found within the photo. So say, for example, in this image, you see there some cyclists and a background. A semantic segmentation model, for example, would say, okay, this is part of the bicycle, this is background, and this is part of the person. How to do this? Again, you know, machine learning, it has like all different models for every specific small use case. But one of the more conventional models, I would say, for semantic segmentation would be a UNet. The reason why I'm now just showing this one is not because this is the answer, but just to give a little bit insights on how the concept goes. The concept of like a UNet, for example, is that it will take in the input image. It will downsample this image to start to understand a little bit what it's actually dealing with. Okay, this is a bike, this is a cyclist, and so on. And then it will start to upsample this in order to then create this pixel mass that you will see in the output. However, in the meantime, it's also preserving its information through the concatenated information on top. So why is this interesting is because it will never remove something from the image, because every input can be interesting. However, it can also add more downsampling steps in order to understand the image better. The reason why it's called a UNet, quite obvious, is because it's shaped like a U. So if we have this model and we are going to apply it on our fields, we still have one single problem, and that is that fields are glued together. Normally you have two different fields that are still next to each other, and of course this is not something that you want. Even in this example, the two cyclists, they're not one cyclist. So if you want to delineate one person, then it's going to be quite difficult. So a novel way to solve this problem is by creating watersheds. So what this means is that if there are two individual fields next to each other, you're going to draw a line in between, or a gap actually in between, that will say, like, okay, this gap is not seen as a field anymore, so that the algorithm will know that there are two separate fields. However, it's not really without any problems, because what a semantic segmentation model would learn now is just to know what are the regions of fields. And as you see here, if you would try to draw a boundary around each and every blob of yellow, then it would still not delineate one field. It would just say, okay, this is the lower region of your field, this is the upper region of all the fields. So there is actually a clever way to prevent this from happening, and this is actually an idea that we stole or lent from cell delineation, so just like the biological cells. And this is to add more weight on the watersheds, or like on the empty spots in between that really matter. So the closer two cells are to each other, the more you're going to say, like, okay, you cannot predict anything on this line between because they have to be separate. So you see it here quite well. The red lines are with a lot of weight, where then here, for example, is a little bit less weight, and then here is just a regular weight of weight 1, to make sure that it will never over-predict these fields. If you would then apply this, and then this here would be then the weight map, where a brighter color would be a higher weight, then the result is there. It is indeed successfully delineating parts of the bigger fields. However, it's also going to get rid of a lot of the smaller fields. But this is, in the end, the example I'm showing here was just a pocket model that was not too smart either. But by adding enough training data into the model and optimizing a little bit more into for the smaller fields, we're actually going to create a model that is quite well already at delineating the fields. Luckily, the model is not perfect, but luckily there are still plenty of other steps that we can make. So this is already a result that we get from just a regular RGB image. Luckily also a little bit of a higher resolution so that there is more room for error between two fields, because there are more pixels that it always has to mispredict in order to concatenate two different fields together. But there is still, as I said, room for improvement. So RGB-only images give already some decent results, some mispredictions here and there. However, there are actually a lot of extra wavelengths that we can also rely on in order to make a better prediction, because with remote sensing you can make use of the full hyperspectral light spectrum. And on the other hand, we also are only basing ourselves on one single observation. Let me go into this into a little bit more detail. So on one hand, you have the light spectrum that is not only limited to what we see. So on the left side, you see, for example, just a regular RGB image. But by combining different wavelengths over higher up in the spectrum, quite in an efficient way, you can get way more information out of this. And for example, here, this information, it's using the NDVI. What that is, I will say in a second. But by this, you already see quite good a distinguish between two different fields. Say, for example, green, red, yellow, it's quite clear. However, it's also introducing a little bit of noise. Say, the red line that you see over there. That's obviously something that a model has to be robust against. What you can do in the spectrum is quite a bit. The reason why this is so interesting is because a lot of the useful indices that remote sensing engineers work with, especially within agriculture, come over the higher frequency bands. One of the examples is the normalized difference vegetation index. As I said, there are a lot of different combinations, and we tend to say that these are different indices. So normalized difference X index. So for example, there's also vegetation index, there's also tillage index that searches for tillage. There's also water index that searches for water, and so on and so on. This one, however, is, I think, the most pronounced within the field, and it's searching for healthy vegetation. How it works, in a nutshell, is that the plants will absorb all the visible lights, or red, green, and blue, by the act of photosynthesis, where it will reflect higher spectrum light, say for example near infrared. So in other words, if you're going to look at the combination of them, the sort of normalized difference between them, then you will see that healthy crops will have a very high NDVI because they absorb almost all the visible light while reflecting the other light, the near infrared, for example. An unhealthy crop has less. So here you see it from that to unhealthy to very healthy, how the NDVI progresses. And if you apply this to your map, you can also clearly see, for example, things that are not going to be buildings, vegetation, sorry. So this is a building and the green is in vegetation. Why is this relevant is to get like the small lines in between fields that are not populated by healthy crop. So in this way you can more easily find indeed the line between two fields, or even a road that would be very obvious then. As I said, there are a lot of different combinations, and you don't even need to stay at the light spectrum. You can also go further than that. And for example, one of the applications, one of the satellites that we also tend to use quite a lot is a radar sensor, or more or less the synthetic aperture radar. This radar, it will start to analyze the ground based on the relief, based on how it is structured. So say, for example, a building tends to be quite smooth. It will have a very proper bounce on that. But then water or just regular ground has a little bit of a rough surface, so it has a different polarization to how the signal will reflect from it. And even more, there is also a volume scattering, and that's actually the part where we're mostly interested in. If you, for example, have a tree or something of vegetation, the radar signal will tend to bounce all over the place before it goes back into the signal. So then we also know that there is actually something growing on that field. So grass doesn't have that much of a reflectance, but for example, your regular crop, maize or something like that, will have quite a bit of reflectance there as well, or volumized reflectance. So by doing this, again, we can create even more pronounced lines in between the fields to start predicting it. Next to more and better inputs, we can also start predicting how a field will evolve over time, because probably one field will behave different from like a field that's on the side of it. Here you, for example, can see how a field can progress. So you already see quite a bit. This is just an NDVI. You can already see quite some clear boundaries through the fields. But like going over time, you can see more pronounced how the field progresses. Say, for example, here you see a little bit less of the field's boundaries, but by going one step further, you obviously see like, okay, this here is already a field's boundary, and this as well, and so forth and so forth. So if you then create like a three-dimensional capture, or actually fourth already, but the time on top of it, then you can create better predictions by seeing how a field evolves over time. But unfortunately, not every input is perfect. In this case, we have some clouds, because we're still working with satellites, of course. Nonetheless, if this would be your only input image for detecting a field, then you would get, then you're quite unfortunate. However, with then using multiple time segments, there is always one going to be that you can use in your algorithm as well. And voila, a resulting model after this, like if you put all the pieces together and you train it on plenty of data, the results of it is actually really nice, and you can start delineating your fields properly. This was one approach. However, as you know, there are a lot of different types of approaches as well. One would indeed be edge detection, so looking at the image and starting to try to draw some boundaries around it. However, this is quite sensitive to error, and it tends to also merge a lot of fields together. So it is not really the preferred way. However, another good option next to semantic segmentation would also be instance segmentation. Instance segmentation tries to combine both object detection and semantic segmentation together, where it will say, okay, this is one specific field, and this is its boundaries. So as you see here, instead of saying like dog and sheeps, it will say this is one sheep, that's one sheep, and that's one sheep, like it was an object detection. And then it will also start to delineate this field through the use of semantic segmentation. I think the most textbook example in instance segmentation is mask RCNN. Why is this one so interesting? Is because it makes a very clear split between object detection and semantic segmentation, where it will first define what your object of interest is. Say, for example, in this case, a football player. And then it will start segment that a bounding box. So it will draw a bounding box around it, and then from the bounding box, it will start to differentiate the foreground from the background. So it just does one class, and it will say, okay, this is my foreground, and this is the background. And by doing that, you actually create a very nice boundary around the person of interest or item of interest. You can also do this on a field level. And then you actually get quite some decent results as well, similar to semantic segmentation. And now even you don't need to think about the watersheding anymore, because now it will define the object itself. However, as I said, I prefer semantic segmentation a little bit better. The reason why is because this model will create two predictions. And as you might know, two predictions tends also to be 2 times a chance of error. And also the biggest concern here is that it only is really good at detecting very conventional shaped fields. So if you, for example, are looking into Belgian fields, Ukrainian fields that are very big and rectangular, it would be a very good option. However, in South Africa, Spain, and all the places in the world where there's a lot of height difference in the ground, the fields tend to be like snaky. And then it's very difficult, one, to detect the field, and on the other hand, also to differentiate the foreground from the background, because the segmentation model will not really know what the field is we're focusing on anyways. So the main takeaway is that there is actually no really a one-size-fits-all. If you know that your target is Belgium, then actually instant segmentation is going to be a little bit better. However, my 2 cents is that if you want to create a general model that will work across the globe, then the semantic segmentation is probably your best bet. Oh yeah, with this. Tends to generalize a little bit better. Okay, so we have a solution, and I promise you the solution will work good. Nonetheless, we still have some challenges that we also need to face. The main challenge being clouds. I think that I speak, that I have the voice of all the remote sensing engineers and can say that clouds are the biggest enemies of remote sensing because they're always in our way, and yeah, it's hard to see what you cannot see, of course. Nonetheless, there is actually already some research done in regards to this field that I think is quite interesting to share as well. One of our clients, Vito, they developed an algorithm that can see through clouds, they claim. And the results are actually quite promising. So what they're doing is to combine both the optical and the radar together, where optical obviously cannot see through clouds, but radar actually can. They have such a low frequency that they can just go through the clouds. And even though it's not yet, there is a well correlation between the two in order to make proper predictions in regards to that. So as you see here, Sentinel-2 is quite infrequent because there is a lot of clouds that are obstructing, but using enough of the Sentinel-1 data points, they actually can already make quite some nice predictions in NDVI in this case. However, this is actually not yet where it stops. Quite recently, I think a few months ago, Microsoft came out with a paper where they brought this to the next level by using attention-based mechanisms and GANs. And now they are going to have a look at a full image and trying to in-paint and reconstruct the same image where there is a cloud over time. So they're also, again, combining the radar that can see through the clouds together with, I think, a very good in-painting technique over the optical as well. That will create more real or more proper in-paintings in the places where a cloud was normally residing before. Next to that, there is also quite a bit of noise in the data. So I think clouds are the biggest enemy, but the inconsistencies of the satellites might as well be a close second. It's very hard for a satellite to exactly know what to photograph. Satellites tend to jitter a little bit, and for them it will be mere microcentimeters or whatnot. For us it will be kilometers on the ground, or meters at least. So this is also something that you need to take into account. Like, these are two captures of the exact same coordinates as a satellite says, but then with a month apart, and as you see, it shifted quite a bit in there. And this is also something that you need to take into account when developing a model. Because indeed, if you take over time, the boundaries of one field will always need to be tailored towards one specific image. Otherwise, you will have also jittering boundaries. The second one is that public satellites are actually also quite low in resolution. This one is with Sentinel-2. It's just a satellite, but I think that's one of the highest quality public satellites, and they work with pixels of 10 meters on 10 meters. And as you might expect, a lot of things can already happen on 10 meters. Luckily, there are already quite a lot of alternatives. So you can go the paid way, where you can get daily pictures of your lands up till some centimeters. But a lot of open source options are there as well. In Belgium, I know, for example, Geopunt, they give yearly satellite images of full of Flanders, also with a resolution of 10 centimeters on 10 centimeters. So with that, you can for sure delineate your fields as you like. A last challenge that we see is also capturing more frequent data. So the pity is that if you're relying on a satellite, you can only see one specific field once the satellite is flying above it. So for Sentinel-2, that tends to be every 6 days. So indeed, satellites fly around the Earth in a predefined frequency, so matter of days, weeks. So the frequency, the time frequency is also quite limited. But there is a way of combining different satellites. So luckily, there is not even one satellite, but there are tens and tens of satellites flying around the globe that you can rely on. And you can start to align these on top of each other. So this is a part of a work that we did for Yara, one of our clients, where we really needed more frequent data, and we were combining Landsat satellites with Sentinel-2s in order to get enough frequent data while still being a free solution. However, you can also bring it to the max, this concept. And for example, Planet.com, they have their own system in place where they're flying with more than 100 satellites around the globe to get very frequent and very high resolution data. Obviously, this is then a paid option, but they also exist for those interested. That was a mouthful, but we're already almost at the end of my presentation. Not yet. To summarize, today we showed how to delineate a field so that we can enable field monitoring. The reason why we want to do this is because it will give us a lot of different use cases. Say, for example, monitoring your own fields, but also looking at what you can expect from like external parties into the near future. And yeah, that's it. If someone has questions, feel free to ask.